They stole my dog, so I unleashed a slithering nightmare on their perfect lawns. This is the wild tale of revenge, HOA drama, and a yard full of snakes. If you love jaw-dropping neighborhood feuds, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more crazy HOA stories every week. Let's dive into this wild ride. The sun beat down on Willow Creek, a cookie-cutter suburban enclave where every lawn was manicured, every mailbox identical, and every rule enforced with an iron fist by the HOA president, Marjorie Hensley. She was the undisputed queen of the neighborhood, a woman in her late 50s with a perm as tight as her grip on the community. Her clipboard was her scepter, her bi-weekly inspections her royal decree. No one dared defy her, not the kids with their chalk drawings, not the retirees with their unapproved flower beds, and certainly not the newcomers who thought they could skirt the bylaws. But one resident, Ethan Carver, was about to change everything. Ethan, a 34-year-old graphic designer, had moved to Willow Creek 6 months ago, seeking a quiet life with his rescue dog, Boomer, a scruffy mutt with a heart bigger than his bark. The two were inseparable, spending evenings on the porch, Boomer's tail thumping against the wood as Ethan sketched. But Marjorie had other plans. She'd been eyeing Ethan's property since he arrived, noting every infraction: a slightly overgrown hedge, a trash can left out past 7A, and worst of all, Boomer's occasional escapes to chase squirrels. To Marjorie, Boomer was a violation of HOA Code 17.3. No pets shall roam unleashed or disturb the neighborhood's aesthetic. Ethan had received 3 warnings, each more threatening than the last, but he shrugged them off, assuming Marjorie's bark was worse than her bite. He was wrong. One humid July morning, Ethan woke to find Boomer gone. The gate, usually latched, swung open, and a note from the HOA was taped to his door. Animal removed for repeated violations. Contact Willow Creek HOA for retrieval instructions. Panic surged through Ethan as he tore through the house, calling Boomer's name, checking every corner of the yard. His calls went unanswered, and his heart sank as he realized Marjorie had followed through on her threats. She'd had Boomer taken to the county shelter, a place notorious for its strict policies and limited holding periods. Ethan raced to the shelter, only to learn Boomer had been flagged as a problem animal based on Marjorie's complaint. The shelter required a $500 fine and proof of HOA compliance to release him, and even then, there was no guarantee Boomer hadn't already been adopted, or worse. Ethan's pleas fell on deaf ears. The shelter staff cited regulations, their hands tied by Marjorie's influence. Returning home, Ethan's grief morphed into fury. Marjorie had crossed a line, and he wasn't going to let her win. He spent the evening pacing his living room, Boomer's empty bed a painful reminder of her overreach. By midnight, an idea began to form, not just revenge, but a spectacle that would expose Marjorie's tyranny to the entire neighborhood. Ethan wasn't a confrontational man, but he knew how to make a statement. His years as a graphic designer had taught him the power of bold visuals, and he'd grown up in a rural town where he'd learned a thing or two about wildlife. Snakes, he thought. Non-venomous, harmless, but terrifying to someone like Marjorie, who shrieked at the sight of a garden spider. He could flood her pristine yard with snakes, a slithering protest against her control. It was audacious, risky, and perfect. Ethan spent the next day researching, contacting a reptile enthusiast from his old hometown who bred garter snakes for pet stores. The man agreed to supply Ethan with dozens of the wriggling creatures, promising they were safe but would cause a panic. Ethan arranged for the delivery, his plan taking shape like one of his designs. He'd release the snakes under the cover of night, targeting Marjorie's yard, the crown jewel of Willow Creek with its rose bushes and manicured hedges. But first, he needed to ensure Boomer's safety. He returned to the shelter daily, paying partial fines and begging for updates. But the bureaucracy was relentless. Each visit fueled his resolve. By the time the snakes arrived, packed in ventilated crates, Ethan was ready. He wasn't just fighting for Boomer, he was fighting for every resident Marjorie had bullied. As dusk fell, he loaded the crates into his car, his heart pounding with a mix of nerves and exhilaration. The neighborhood slept, Unaware of the chaos about to unfold, Ethan's plan required precision. He parked 2 streets away from Marjorie's house, cloaked in the darkness of a moonless night. The crates hummed with the faint rustle of scales, the garter snakes restless but harmless. Ethan had chosen them for their dramatic effect. Long, sleek, and quick-moving, they'd scatter across Marjorie's lawn like living streamers, impossible to ignore. He wore gloves and a hoodie, not for stealth but to protect himself from the writhing mass he was about to unleash. Marjorie's property sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, its white picket fence glowing faintly under streetlights, a monument to her obsession with perfection. Ethan crept through the shadows, avoiding motion sensor lights he'd mapped out during a casual walk the previous day. His reconnaissance had revealed Marjorie's habits. She was an early riser, always out by 6 a.m. to inspect her roses. The snakes would be her morning surprise. He pried open the first crate, tipping it gently to release the snakes onto the grass. They slithered out in waves, disappearing into the flower beds and under hedges. The second crate followed, then the third, until Marjorie's yard was a silent sea of movement. Ethan worked quickly, his breath shallow, half expecting a neighbor's light to flick on. But Willow Creek remained still, its residents tucked into their predictable lives. By the time he emptied the final crate, nearly 100 snakes had claimed the yard. Ethan retreated, his pulse racing, and drove home, the empty crates rattling in his trunk. He barely slept, imagining Marjorie's reaction. At dawn, her scream echoed through the neighborhood, a high-pitched wail that could have shattered glass. Ethan peeked through his blinds, watching as neighbors gathered, drawn by the commotion. Marjorie stood on her porch, clutching a broom, her face pale as she pointed at the wriggling chaos in her yard. Snakes coiled around her roses, darted across her lawn, and slipped into her koi pond. The sight was everything Ethan had hoped for, pure, unfiltered panic. Neighbors whispered, some horrified, others stifling laughter. Marjorie's reputation as the untouchable HOA queen was crumbling, her pristine yard now a reptilian nightmare. But Ethan's victory was short-lived. By noon, animal control arrived, their vans lining the street. They rounded up the snakes with practiced efficiency, and Marjorie, ever the strategist, began spinning the narrative. She claimed the snakes were a natural infestation, blaming the neighborhood's lax standards and pointing fingers at Ethan's unkempt hedges. Her accusations spread like wildfire, and soon, HOA board members were knocking on Ethan's door, demanding explanations. He denied everything, his face a mask of innocence, but suspicion lingered. Worse, the shelter called with bad news. Boomer's hold period was nearing its end. Ethan's stunt had bought him time, but not enough. He needed to escalate, to turn the neighborhood against Marjorie before she could tighten her grip. He began attending HOA meetings, usually sparsely attended affairs where Marjorie ruled unchallenged. There he planted seeds of dissent, casually mentioning her overreach, her fines, her obsession with control. Other residents nodded, their own grievances surfacing, fines for minor infractions, threats over unapproved paint colors. Ethan's rebellion was gaining traction, but Marjorie was no fool. She sensed the shift and doubled down, issuing new rules and scheduling more inspections. The neighborhood was dividing, and Ethan knew the next move had to be bigger, something that would expose Marjorie's cruelty beyond her yard. He began researching her past, digging into public records and old neighborhood complaints, looking for leverage. The snakes had been a warning shot. The real battle was just beginning. Ethan's research uncovered a goldmine. Marjorie had a history of bending HOA rules for her own benefit, including redirecting community funds to maintain her property while fining others for similar upgrades. Armed with this, he planned his next move. A public shaming at the annual Willow Creek Community Barbecue, an event Marjorie hosted to flaunt her authority. Ethan spent weeks preparing, printing flyers that detailed her abuses, dates, amounts, and violations, all sourced from public records. He didn't stop at Marjorie. He researched the county shelter's ties to the HOA, discovering a pattern of aggressive pet seizures linked to Marjorie's complaints. The barbecue was the perfect stage. Hundreds of residents would attend, expecting Marjorie's usual speech about community pride. Ethan arrived early, slipping flyers under windshield wipers and into mailboxes, ensuring every attendee would see them. As Marjorie took the podium, her smile faltered. Whispers spread as residents read the flyers, their murmurs growing into a restless hum. Ethan stood at the back, watching her squirm. She tried to pivot, praising the HOA's standards, but the crowd wasn't buying it. A retired teacher, fined for her garden gnome, stood up and demanded answers. Others followed, their voices rising. Marjorie's composure cracked, her voice shrill as she deflected blame. Ethan felt a surge of triumph, but it was bittersweet. Boomer was still at the shelter and the clock was ticking. Ethan used the momentum to rally neighbors, forming an informal coalition to challenge Marjorie's leadership. They demanded a vote to replace her, citing HOA bylaws she'd conveniently ignored. Marjorie fought back, threatening legal action and rallying her loyalists, mostly older residents who feared change. The neighborhood was now a battleground, split between those tired of her reign and those too intimidated to oppose her. Ethan's flyers had exposed her, but exposure wasn't enough. He needed Boomer back and he needed Marjorie gone. He began working with a lawyer, a neighbor who'd been fined for an unapproved fence, to file a formal complaint with the county. The lawyer uncovered more. Marjorie had falsified reports to justify pet seizures, including Boomer's. Ethan's hope reignited, but the shelter's deadline loomed. He visited daily, sneaking treats to Boomer through the bars, promising to bring him home. The snakes had been a spectacle, but this fight required strategy. Ethan organized a petition, gathering signatures to overhaul the HOA board. The barbecue had shifted the tide, but Marjorie was digging in, her influence deep-rooted. Ethan knew the final push would test his resolve, and he couldn't afford to lose. The petition gained traction, with over half the neighborhood signing within days. Ethan's coalition grew, fueled by years of resentment toward Marjorie's rule. They held secret meetings in basements and backyards, planning their next steps. Marjorie, sensing her empire crumbling, retaliated with a barrage of fines and notices targeting Ethan's allies. She even hired a private investigator to dig into Ethan's past, hoping to discredit him. But Ethan was clean. No skeletons, just a man fighting for his dog. The lawyer uncovered a bombshell. Marjorie's falsified shelter reports violated county ordinances, potentially making her liable for damages. Ethan filed a formal complaint, and the county launched an investigation. Marjorie's allies began to waver, unwilling to risk legal trouble. At the next HOA meeting, Ethan presented the petition, backed by the lawyer's findings. The room was packed, tension thick as residents debated. Marjorie's usual confidence was gone. She stammered through her defense, her clipboard trembling in her hands. The vote was called, and by a narrow margin, Marjorie was ousted as HOA president. Cheers erupted, but Ethan's focus was on Boomer. The county investigation forced the shelter to release him, citing Marjorie's fraudulent claims. Ethan drove there immediately, tears welling as Boomer bounded into his arms, tail wagging furiously. The neighborhood celebrated, but Marjorie didn't go quietly. She vowed to sue, claiming defamation, but her threats rang hollow. The new HOA board, led by the retired teacher, began rewriting the bylaws, prioritizing fairness over control. Ethan's yard became a gathering spot, neighbors bringing beers and stories of their own HOA battles. The snakes, now a neighborhood legend, were long gone, but their impact lingered. Marjorie moved away months later. Her house sold to a young family who painted it a bright, unapproved yellow. Willow Creek was changing, its residents empowered to question authority. Ethan and Boomer resumed their evenings on the porch, the neighborhood quieter but stronger. The battle had been won, but Ethan knew vigilance was key. HOAs could breed new Marjories, and he'd be ready. If you loved this wild HOA saga, smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more insane neighborhood stories. Drop a comment with your craziest HOA tale. We might feature it next.